afternoon, everyone. I want to welcome you to another episode of Hey, Wait a Minute. I didn't know that. Sponsored by Columbia Southern University, where we bring real world conversations from veterans who are serving. And I would say just so many dynamic things that we're doing out here across the industry, across nonprofit, everywhere. And this conversation is meant to give you that real world, I won't say raw conversation, but the reality of what military transition is. It may not look like what the book said, the manual says, and it may not be what the plan that you have laid down always materialize into. It's a process. For me, I'm Todd Simmons with Columbia Southern University, and I am honored to introduce today's guest is Gabe Sotero from the Home Depot. And Gabe works at the Home Depot, and we know each other from a cohort from spending the last 4 or 5 months together. But Gabe today is the program manager for military relations at Home Depot and a U.S. Navy veteran. And I'll let him tell you a little bit about that. So, hey, Gabe, first and foremost, I want to thank you and welcome you to the conversation. I know veterans from the feedback of our first episode will get a lot out of this, the diversity of people that we're bringing on. So I just want to give you a brief second to let everyone know, just a brief introduction of your military service, your background, like kind of, what led you here today to where you're at in Home Depot.
Thanks, Todd. It's great to be here. I appreciate the invitation. Really, it's an honor to be asked, and I'm happy and really looking forward to this conversation. So like you, I'm a veteran too. I grew up in San Juan, Puerto Rico, spent the first 18 years of my life there. And then as I was going off to college, I actually got a scholarship to be in Navy ROTC. And that lined up really well with what I wanted to do growing up. I wanted to be a pilot. And I know it sounds like a little boy dreaming of things, but in my case, I decided to pursue that. And I was able to do just that. So as I graduated college, I was commissioned as an officer in the Navy, and I went on to my flight training right away. So I was off to the races from the very beginning after finishing my education. And I loved it. And because I loved it, I stayed on active duty for 25 years. And I had a relatively traditional career when it comes to the Navy. I was flying off aircraft carriers, and I was doing a bunch of different deployments overseas. So those in the audience who've been in the Navy, they're probably going like, yep, been there, done that. And it's pretty much just like that. Went to the Middle East, the Western Pacific, all the places that we have a presence, just like anybody in the military has probably deployed to. And along the way, I got to grow as a leader. I got lots of opportunities to, get better at it. Got a lot of mentorship from my senior enlisted leaders, also from my officers who were my bosses. And eventually, I went and became the commanding officer of 2 separate helicopter squadrons, one in San Diego and later on one out in Guam in the Western Pacific. Great leadership challenges, but a lot of help with teams that, kind of help make sure that I was doing sanity checks on big decisions that I could make. And then beyond that, I wrapped up my career at the Naval War College in Newport, Rhode Island, and retired from active duty about 5 years ago. Following that, we moved down to Atlanta, and that's where we live today.
Well, awesome, Gabe. I can tell you what I did not hear. I did not hear any bad locations. I'm going to tell you that. I was sitting here counting. I was sitting here waiting on the bad location. Oh yeah, I did some time in Guam, and I was in San Diego. Yeah. I'm my favorite place. Yeah. Then I just moved to Atlanta, favorite place. So no, that's great. So I appreciate you giving us that background.
Yeah. So, the Navy's got the market cornered on top-notch properties, right? The Army's got some pretty sketchy ones. No disrespect to my Army friends. And same for the Air Force. It just seems to find places in the middle of nowhere where you can make a lot of noise and, drop a lot of ordnance. And the Navy has to be on the coast because Navy. That worked out well.
Yeah. I mean, we have to fly planes. And the Navy, Navy was my first service of choice, just, off track there. But the Navy could not guarantee that I would not serve on a ship. So we could not meet in the middle on that. So somehow the Air Force guaranteed me that I didn't have to go on the ship. So, they kind of won the bid there. So I want to talk about, exactly that, what we just kind of transitioned into in military skills. You talk about mentorship, you talk about all these things that develop you as a leader, that, that really define you when you wore the uniform. If you can kind of tease out just a few skills, like what would you say your military skills or what skills aided you in transition into the position that you hold today? Like, what were some things that you went, that is direct transition into how I can be a leader in one of the largest, companies in this country?
Mhm. Certainly. One of the things that I had to consider as I transition, like anybody else is transitioning, is what skills do I want that I want to carry forward with me? And what skills do I have that I don't need to be using anymore? Maybe I'm leaving them behind. Maybe, in my case, I was a pilot in the military. I was not interested in commercial flying. And I said, that's a skill I'm going to leave behind. And I just made that conscious decision. And that I'm sure applies to many transitioning service members who have a particular, specialty, a particular MOS. And they're like, you know what? I've done that for long enough. I'm ready to go do something else. But among those skills that I learned during my time in the Navy, some were while flying, others were while having opportunities to lead people. You develop a skill in decision making. It sounds a little trite, but having been in the civilian world for a while, I realized some people struggle with making decisions. In the military, as leaders, we learn to make decisions. And we learn that sometimes we have to make them quickly without having all the information we'd like to make. That's a skill that's highly prized in the civilian sector. Yes, you have to do a quick risk assessment. Yes, you have to figure out what the long-term consequences might be of those decisions. But that's a skill that I was able to develop in the military, and it made me less afraid to make decisions. I could make a decision today and I say, you know what? I might be making a mistake. There might be some things I'm not thinking about, but on balance, I think it's a right call to make. And I'm going to make that call today. And this is what we're going to do. I know that when we're followers of a leader who kind of dawdles or is indecisive, doesn't come across as a very strong leader. And I tried to emulate that, by not having that skill and saying, I want to be a decision maker. I want to be able to not just be decisive for the sake of being decisive, but trying to make the right decisions that are going to work for my team. The other one that comes along is the ability to think on your feet. In the military, you often have to figure out how to solve problems without having all the pieces, without having all the tools at your disposal. You can be out in the field trying to build something and you're short of a few tools and materials, but you know what? You figure it out.
Yeah.
Or you can be in a situation where you're far away from home, where you're deployed unit and you're trying to, make sure everybody gets fed, for example, or that the mail is being delivered the way it has to be. And there's certain things you can't control, but those you can control, we figure things out. And that's a skill that is very highly prized, both in the military and out. If you're resourceful and you are not intimidated by tough problems, and you can say, we'll figure it out. And this is how we're going to figure out. I figured out that was a good skill to have. And I was able to wrap it into my own story as I started to market, my own brand as I departed the military. And that takes me to branding, which we can talk about if you want, because as we exit the military, many of us have to rebrand. And it can be difficult, especially after you've been part of an organization for so many years.
Absolutely. And that leads into a great question about rebranding. When we talk about transitioning from the military, I like to open the conversation up, for, when I'm talking about it out and about, some of us, I did 25 years also, but it's a little bit different. And we still have a lot, majority of the veterans who transition are transition out at 4 and 6 years, actually. Mm-hmm. So, and I love a company like Home Depot. Like I said before our segment started, it's right across the street from me. I have 27 screwdrivers from you guys, but literally.
Thank you for your business.
So I love Home Depot as a company. And when I was reaching out to you, I wanted you to definitely be one of the first people because, man, what a wide variety of veterans that you attract at Home Depot. I mean, you can attract someone at 23, 24 years right out of service. You can attract folks like yourself who are coming out of more executive roles in the military and looking for something. And I think that's not always understood in companies like Home Depot. So if you were to talk to the veterans that are listening to this, that are looking at a company like Home Depot and several others, that they're looking at it, like, well, where do I fit? And you talk about branding. Oh, I was a pilot, or I was an infantryman, or I was an MP, or all these different jobs. What kind of skills do I need to have to attract myself into the job that's equivalency to what I did in the previous life in the military?
That's a great question, Todd, and it's one I get a lot. The Home Depot is a large company. It's actually about the size of the U.S. Army. We have about 460,000 associates across the United States. We have about 2,000 stores. So The answer to your question is, there are many skills that people from the military can bring into roles at the Home Depot because we do so many different things.
Yeah.
We need people who have skills with tools to be, for example, tool technicians.
Mm.
We have people with skills in sales, maybe recruiters, for example, who are very good at connecting with other people and selling them on joining the military. We need people with cybersecurity skills because we have our own teams of cybersecurity professionals who make sure that our systems remain safe. We need HR professionals. We need project managers. We need people with legal training because we have an office of legal counsel. So really, because we are a large company, we have a need for various skill sets. And anybody who is interested in pursuing a role at the Home Depot, I would encourage them to visit our military careers page at homedepot.com/careers, because there is an opportunity for folks to do many, many things. And I hadn't even mentioned logistics. We do have an entire supply chain infrastructure that makes sure that our goods get from point A to point B, and then they get to the customer. And there's plenty of people in the military who did that and were quite good at it. And so that leads me, to know and to believe, and I have witnessed a number of veterans make that transition. And every single team I mentioned, I know of a veteran within the Home Depot, at least one, that works in that particular space.
No, that's great. I mean, you just educated me on that because, we walk into some of these institutions that we are customers of, and we think about the front end and we don't think about what's happening in the back end. And I think that was one of the greatest things of our cohort that we're in. And I got to meet people from so many different corporate jobs that are working veteran spaces, and to see all of the different opportunities for veterans, and for me to be able to, highlight Home Depot now as I go out and talk, hey, you're cyber, something I wouldn't even have thought about. The Home Depot has cyber, and it was like, you can probably work there. And I know a guy. So that give you some information. So that begs to, talking about branding a little bit there in transition and networking. And, I've seen the word networking and how we use it and the philosophy of networking in so many different ways. I know last couple of years, the military has been really high on LinkedIn. I've honestly been on LinkedIn for about 14 years, and I think it's probably the best investment I've made, way back as, when I was a young E7, way back. But, networking today is taking on so many different forms with COVID, post-COVID, the opportunities for this, so many opportunities. So what would you tell somebody, in uniform today and doing transition and post-transition? How do they have a really good networking strategy and philosophy? Like, what does that look like that doesn't make it look transactional?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Great question. And you're right. It's something that's critical, I would say crucial to a successful transition. The number one thing I would say is start early. You can never start too early, because if you don't want to be transactional, as you just said, you have to build that relationship. You have to water the plants. You can't just meet somebody at a networking event and then go back to them 3 years later and say, hey, remember me? We met at that, back and forth. And the other person's going to be like, I have no clue who you are. So I'm not going to be in a great position to help you. And, the upshot is that it takes effort. And networking is difficult. Networking, as with any other skill, it takes practice. When I started networking, I would kind of stumble over telling my own story, depending on the audience and what I wanted to share. But the more I did it, the better, and more importantly, more comfortable I got with telling my story. And we have such awesome stories to tell, but we have to tell them in a way that others can identify with them. Because if we start throwing a lot of acronyms and things we did and units we belong to, we're going to lose more than half the audience. You got to be able to tell a story in a way that somebody with zero military experience will understand it. I tell people, imagine you're at a family Thanksgiving dinner and your Aunt Etna is going to say, hey, Timmy, tell me what you do in the military. And you tell your story in a way that your Aunt Etna will understand it. So I'm not asking you to dumb it down, but you need to use the right language so that somebody can go, oh, I get that. Wow, that's pretty impressive. And the networking piece will help you with this, because the more you tell your story, the more you practice, whether it's your elevator pitch or your transition story, or, the better you get at it. It's like going to the batting cage and taking a bunch of reps before the game. You do it and you do it and you do it. And then if you start doing it about a year or a couple of years before your actual transition, once you get into the sweet spot of that transition, you're there. You're in the zone. You're like, I've been doing this for a little while. I'm very comfortable going to an event and talking to people, getting those relationship goings, going, and then I can connect with them later on LinkedIn, or I can just keep a phone call going, or I can maybe be introduced to somebody else. All those things come together. The earlier you start, it will help you get positioned for it quite well.
Absolutely. Oh, you bring up such a great point on that. And I will tell you, I retired and you were in the Navy and I was in the Air Force. But if I was to tell you I was the command chief of Air University, even as a fellow service member, you probably take pause and have to start dialing back. What exactly does that mean?
Yep.
And it took me about a year. And this is someone who prepared a little bit. It took me a little bit post and people were, oh, what did you do in the military? What did you retire? Oh, I was in, and I can see the glazed look in their face. And it took me a minute to go, well, no, I was in charge of education in the Air Force.
There you go. Yep.
Brings a whole different perspective. And then if I had to break that down, hey, I was the senior enlisted leader. I was the enlisted leader with the general. We were two people in charge of education for the Air Force. And it really simplified the way I entered the door. And because, for networking, like you said, the transactional piece out here, and I've been out 5 years and I have a couple of business ventures and different things. And I'm networking is essentially my life.
Yeah.
It's probably 70% of my life.
It doesn't stop.
It doesn't stop. It's daily. And how you enter the door, how you come through the front door, and that first 10 seconds of how you present yourself is critical.
Yeah.
And
that, if I may, you just reminded me something I tell a lot of veterans. Again, it sounds a little weird, but you got to smile. Veterans can often come across as relatively rigid. I mean, I get you're nervous because you're talking to somebody you haven't met before. And that person who's looking at you as a veteran is like a tough guy who's been doing all these things. Mm-hmm. A smile can be incredibly disarming and engaging, and it can make you approachable, and it can establish a connection in the same way that it does in all other engagements in life. As a veteran, you should not forget about that, silly as it may sound.
Absolutely. And you got to get rid of, and I can tell people, I kind of did this in uniform too. I lean into my quirks, right? Mm-hmm. And it's like, it's okay. It's okay to be human. It's okay to be yourself. It's okay to be, and I tell people, I'm a natural introvert. I am. I'm not, but I found ways to connect with people that makes me feel comfortable and that will also make them feel comfortable. I call it pulling the string, trying to find little things of interest. I try to stay away from the transactional. Tell me what you do. Tell me where you live. Tell me where you're from. Tell me how many kids. Those things should be inserted kind of naturally, not really. I don't try to over the top those things. So no, that's great. Networking. I appreciate that philosophy. And I think it's critical advice. And I think as we go through the next 8 of these posts, because the last guest was exactly the same answer. You have to network, you have to engage, you have to be comfortable in getting outside of your comfort zone. Yeah. And before we go to our last part of this segment, I want you to kind of think, real quick, what advice would you give someone transitioning, looking to start their military career in management or senior position? And that's a 2-part question, because the second part of that is I'm doing a project that's kind of analyzing and looking at data and where I've been in the transition space for the last couple of years. And we had to do a target group first, and we're targeting, senior enlisted, basically E9s in all of the branches of service. And what we're looking at there is a lot, from a survey, is a lot of senior enlisted who retire within the first 2 years will come back on a survey and say they feel underemployed. Mm-hmm. Underemployed. And a lot of that is because of, a lot of things we've talked about, maybe transition, maybe, understanding what's out on the other side of the gates after so many decades in the military. Some of it could be education. Some of it could be qualifications. It's a lot of different factors. It's not an equal thing in the officer or the enlisted world that you're going to go be a senior exec in a civilian organization. That is not guaranteed. But if you were to give advice, say to a E9 in one of our branches of military today, and we'll just, for that target group that was looking to transition from what I call the E-suite to the C-suite, it was looking to transition into a management position in Home Depot or anything that you've seen in the corporate world, what would you tell them that they should really self-analyze in themselves today? What should they be looking at transition? And what are those things that we just talked about in the last 20 minutes, all encompassed in, that you would give them the best piece of advice to start doing?
Yeah, there are so many things that somebody can do to position themselves to go forward on the right foot. And it starts with figuring out the basics.
Mhm.
Where do you want to live? How much money do you need to make to live the life you want to live?
Mhm.
Um, do you have a family, and does that family come with you? And are you looking to settle down somewhere so you don't have to move again? These are, I know they're like 101 types
Yeah.
questions, but you need to figure that stuff out because it'll play a role. And then along with that, what kind of industry do you want to get into? Do you want to get into, tech? Do you want to get into retail? Do you want to do something else? And there's so much stuff out there, it can be overwhelming. But as you do that, you also have to figure out how to tell your story. And I say this, I said it in a previous question, but I say it because it takes practice. And as somebody who's getting ready to transition, if they want to go be in a leadership position, they need to be able to come across as such a leader. But the language and the approach and the demeanor all need to be calibrated to whatever it is they need to do. I realize that people who are retiring from the military at the more senior ranks, the E7s, E8s, the O5s and above, they're going to bring a certain amount of gravitas and maturity, and they need to make sure that that shows.
Mhm.
Um, they also need to feel comfortable in speaking in terms of I as opposed to in terms of we.
Mhm.
A company's not looking to hire your team, they're looking to hire you. And that can be very uncomfortable for a number of leaders in the military because you grow up in a culture of the we. It's a culture of taking care of our team, and rightfully so. But that may no longer be the case as we exit. And we need to be unafraid to say, these are the things I accomplished. I led my team to do these things. And I helped my team accomplish these things, or I did these things. That can be an uncomfortable place for a number of transitioning veterans as they figure out what their next is going to be. And that needs to be part of your story. And you tell the story, you practice your story, you tell it to your family so they can hear you tell it and they can say, yeah, Dad, you got to work on that a little more because you're still looking pretty stiff, or you're not coming across as very sincere. Those are things that take practice, but those are things that transitioning service members can do so that they can start getting in a more comfortable space. And the other thing I'll say is give yourself permission to move on if your first job does not work. Many people, throw that stat out saying, 60% of veterans leave their first post-military job within the first year. To me, that's more of a feature than a bug.
Yeah.
Many of those veterans who leave that job leave it for a better position. And that's a good thing. So as part of the transition, we need to tell ourselves, in my opinion, my next job doesn't have to be a 20-year job. If it is, then great. I'm very happy for you, and I wish you well, and I congratulate you on having found your
Yeah.
next out of the gate, because not many people do.
Yeah.
But for most of us, it might take a couple of tries, and that's okay. We tend to be loyal as veterans, very, very loyal. So the first employer that offers us an opportunity that matches what we want to do, we tend to be like, wow, I'm on it. I'm going to be working all hours of the day and night. I'm going to pour my soul into this.
Yeah.
And if it doesn't pan out, sometimes we feel a little guilty to move on. And we should not. We should be able to say, it's okay. I'm going to go do something else that works best for me. So those are various pieces that I would urge a transitioning service member. And I'll cap it off by saying that there's a number of organizations out there happy to help you out. The vast majority are free. If you should not have to pay for the service.
Mhm.
And I would urge veterans to connect with organizations that work for them. And there's a huge constellation of them out there. But some help you with your outer journey, which is what I call the networking piece. Others help you with your inner journey, what I call like the motivations and values piece. So you should find a combination of those that work for you, because I found them to be immensely helpful.
Absolutely. And I would caveat on that, Gabe, that 5 years out of the military, I still find those organizations immensely helpful. I
Mhm.
still engage in, some veterans believe that it is a transition, your 12-month transition, and once you're out and you find your job, that those resources are no longer valuable. I would
Mhm.
tell you today, unlike any time I would know in our history, there's so many veteran organizations out there, non-veteran organizations that's so willing to help. I know we were together last week, and I was telling my wife, my family, that last week was probably one of the most impactful weeks I've had in a long time, at the space in life that I'm in right now, being in the room and being a business owner and entrepreneur and these different things that I have my hands in, and really having a few light bulb moments listening to people who have been immensely successful in business and in life and leadership. And I wouldn't have had that opportunity if I wasn't a veteran or if I wasn't connected to the veteran space continuously post uniform. if I just would have disconnected. So those opportunities are always there, and I echo Gabe's comments about go find them. They're
Mhm.
they're there, and if you're on LinkedIn, once you're in the algorithm of one or two of those organizations, everything starts showing up, and I know I'm continuously looking for opportunities and passing opportunities to people.
Mhm.
Gabe, that we're going to wrap this up with our last kind of question. And I will tell you, this has been impactful. In the way we wanted to structure these conversations is not to make it 2 hours long. Let's have some really pointed, targeted conversations from such a diverse group of people that people can listen to over and over in kind of a podcast manner that it's less than 30 minutes. I can drive, and I live in the DC area. So you're not going anywhere up here for less than 30 minutes. So you can
That's true.
you can listen to 3 episodes before you even get to work most places up here. I just drove an hour and 22 minutes yesterday just to play golf. So I know it. It's only 20 miles, 27 miles from my house. But but the last question is kind of the title of this whole endeavor that we're on. Wait a minute, I didn't know that. And if you can think of one moment authentic moment that you had when you retired and the uniform was off, the terminal leave was over, and you were Gabe, and that's it. And you went, it could be a year later. What light bulb moment did you have post-military that went, hey, wait a minute, I did not know that, and I really wish I did?
Yeah, there's a couple that come to mind, but to focus on one, which happened after I had already transitioned, that was that my military career was helpful in maybe getting me my first post-military job.
Mhm.
But beyond that, the effect fades.
Mm.
Many of us think as we transition, I'm going to leverage my career and I'm going to have this great post-military career. And that might be the case, but I would argue that after your first position, maybe your second position after the military, what you did in the military starts fading into the background because you are now judged on what you have accomplished more recently.
Mm.
And so as I now, I work on tailoring my resume every now and then, and I'm realizing my military experience is fading further into the background. And so that was a kind of an aha moment I had after I've been out of the military for a little bit, because we had this massive experience for 20 plus years. And you say, hey, this is part of who I am. And now it's part of what I did. And it stays with me as part of my identity. But I think part of a transition is forging that new identity. And it took me maybe about a year, maybe a couple of years to say, yeah, that military experience is only going to take me so far. And now I need to leverage my current experience and what I'm doing in my post-military career to be an attractive candidate or to be of value to whatever organization I'm working with. That was kind of an aha moment for me.
I tell you what, Gabe, I'm taking that 2 minutes that you just gave, and that's going to be a whole separate clip. Because I was sitting here and so many light bulb moments was going off. You're so right. And it made me realize that, yeah, that made me realize just in that moment that what I do now, the things that I'm having the opportunities that are coming to me today is largely based on what I did post-military. Now,
Sure.
some of the military experience helps, but really the opportunities I'm getting in business and as an entrepreneur today is solely built off of the last 4 years of entrepreneurship.
Yeah. And as a veteran, you need to be comfortable with that. You need to say, it was part of who I was, it's part of who I am, but it's not necessarily what I'm doing right now. And people care more about what you're doing right now or what you have done most recently. For me, that was an aha moment.
Awesome. I appreciate that. Ladies and gentlemen, you just heard it from someone I continue to learn from, from Presence. He mentioned that earlier about presence and how do you communicate. I will tell you, I spent the last 4.5, almost 5 months with this individual, with Gabe, and if I was to take away one of the many nuggets that I can say about him just in a short 5 months, the presence says everything. How he shows up in a room, his demeanor, when he speaks, everyone pays attention. Gabe, I will tell you, I appreciate you spending this time with us. I know you're busy. I know it's a busy world going on. I know Home Depot keeps you busy, a large organization. And I want to say thank you on behalf of Columbia Southern University, myself. We thank you for continuing the service that you do to veterans all across this nation. It's meaningful. And the conversation you just had, if it just reaches one person, which I know it will reach more, but someone will email me in the next 2 weeks and said, how do I get a hold of that guy? And I'll say, well, you need to start a transformational relationship by saying hi on LinkedIn. And
That works.
that's where life starts. So thank you again, Gabe. I appreciate it. And we're going to be out here in the DMV on a very, very rainy day. So thank you again.
Thank you, Todd. I appreciate all the work you're doing as well. And thank you for having me.
Thank you.